She had everything the camera could capture. But behind the glamour, every triumph came with a hidden price, one she paid in silence for decades. From a traumatized girl in post-war London to the most iconic villain on television, Joan Collins's journey was anything but the fairy tale the world believed. Stay until the end to discover how she turned unspeakable pain into an empire, and what that cost her along the way. In the spring of 1933, a baby girl was born in Paddington, London, so luminously beautiful that her mother had to hang a sign on her stroller. "Please, do not kiss me." This was Joan Henrietta Collins, eldest child of Joseph William Collins, a theatrical agent with clients like the Beatles and Tom Jones, and Elsa Besant, a former nightclub hostess and dance teacher. The family was cultured, connected, and shaped by the Blitz. During the London bombings, the Collins household huddled in tube stations as the city burned overhead. Joan would later describe growing up in wartime as formative, not in triumph, but in learning to survive while pretending everything was normal. By her teens, she had enrolled at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art, stage-trained by 17, and bearing a face that made strangers stop mid-sentence. Her father, though a powerful agent, was reportedly dismissive of his children's ambitions. The man who represented entertainment royalty had little patience for his daughter's acting dreams. Yet Joan persisted, making her stage debut at 9 in Henrik Ibsen's Odul's House, and signing her first film contract by 17. In 1951, Joan Collins stepped onto a film set for the first time, uncredited, in Lady Godiva Rides Again, a beauty pageant picture that used her as decoration rather than art. The roles that followed throughout the 1950s were a brutal education in studio system typecasting. I Believe in You, Land of the Pharaohs, The Girl in the Red Velvet Swing. She moved between B-movies and prestige projects, always cast as the sultry temptress, the calculating woman, the seductress who would do anything for power. By 18, she had been voted the most beautiful girl in England by a photography consortium, her face appearing on magazine covers across the UK. Yet beauty, as she would learn, was not freedom. It was a cage with a velvet lining. In 1954, at just 19, Joan gave an interview to a London newspaper complaining about her studio, rank, and how it had failed to nurture its female talent. The statement was bold for an unknown actress, but it revealed something crucial. Joan Collins did not accept the role she had been assigned. She questioned it, and that resistance would define her entire life. Then came May 24th, 1952, a date that fractured everything. Joan married Maxwell Reid, a 33-year-old Irish actor, knowing him only casually through London theater circles. What the world saw was a glamorous union. What Joan experienced was trauma she would not speak about for more than 60 years. At 17, before the marriage, Reid had invited her to his apartment. There, according to Joan's later accounts, revealed in her 2023 BBC documentary, This Is Joan Collins, he drugged her drink with what would have been called a Mickey Fin in that era, today recognized as something closer to Rohypnol. She was a virgin, she would later say, equivalent mentally to a 12-year-old in terms of sexual knowledge. The assault was brutal and disorienting. Afterward, consumed by shame and the cultural messaging of her generation, that if you had sex, you got married, Joan agreed to marry the man who had assaulted her. She was 19. He was 33. They had a wedding. They had a life together that included, allegedly, Reid's attempt to sell her to a wealthy Arab businessman for £10,000, a transaction from which Joan fled in tears. For 4 years, she endured this marriage, concealing the truth behind lipstick and studio photographs. When she finally filed for divorce in 1956, she told no one the real reason. The shame she internalized, the trauma she locked away. This was the price of beauty in an era that had no language for what had been done to her. What no one planned for was that Joan Collins would survive. After her divorce, she began to reclaim fragments of herself. She dated producer Arthur Lowe Jr., then actor Warren Beatty, whom she became engaged to in 1960, until his infidelity ended the engagement. She worked steadily in films, became a successful model, supplementing her acting income, and developed a reputation as someone who spoke her mind, unusual for a young actress in a system designed to silence women. But in 1961, she met Anthony Newley, an English singer and actor with charisma and ambition of his own. They married in 1963, when Joan was 5 months pregnant with their daughter Tara. 2 years later, their son Alexander was born. For the first time, Joan experienced something resembling a normal domestic life. She had children she adored, a partner in the industry who understood the grind, and years she would later describe as happy. But infidelity lived in that marriage like a ghost. Anthony had wandered. Joan discovered it. In 1969, he wrote, directed, and starred in a bizarre musical film called Can Hieronymus Merkin Ever Forget Mercy Humpe and Find True Happiness? A barely veiled autobiography in which he played a man who bedded dozens of women, casting Joan as a character named Polyester Poontang. She watched her husband perform his own infidelity on screen, a meta-betrayal that left deep scars. By 1971, the marriage dissolved. She was 37 years old, a working mother with 2 children, and the industry had already begun to typecast her in a way that suggested her prime was behind her. Throughout the 1960s and early 1970s, Joan withdrew somewhat from acting to focus on her children, taking on guest television roles in Star Trek, Batman, and The Virginian. But in 1972, she married for the 3rd time. Ron Cass, an American businessman who served as president of Apple Records and was connected to the Beatles production company. She became pregnant almost immediately, and their daughter Katiana, known as Katie, was born in June 1972. For the first 3 years of their marriage, Joan has written, she was genuinely happy. Cass was intelligent, ambitious, and seemed to offer stability. But then came the fall. Ron was fired from Apple, and the dismissal triggered something in him, a descent into heroin addiction that would reshape the family's entire trajectory. As his drug use spiraled, their finances destabilized. Joan was working, but Ron's addiction consumed their resources and his capacity to parent. Then, on a day in 1980 that Joan would later describe as the worst thing that ever happened to me, their 8-year-old daughter Katiana was hit by a car. The collision was severe. Katie sustained serious brain injuries and fell into a coma that lasted 47 days. Joan spent those weeks in a hospital, watching her youngest daughter hover between life and death, while her husband, according to Joan's later account, received the news and rolled over in bed to go back to sleep. Katie miraculously recovered, but the incident shattered the last bonds of the marriage. The combination of Ron's addiction, his emotional absence during the crisis, and their financial ruin led to divorce in 1983. Joan was heartbroken, exhausted, and beginning to feel like a woman for whom the world had no use anymore. In 1985, on the cusp of her 50s, and with her film career largely behind her, Joan Collins took a chance. She married for the 4th time Swedish pop singer Peter Holm, a charming blonde man 13 years her junior, who promised stability and partnership. They married in Las Vegas in November 1985, a whirlwind romance that seemed, briefly, to offer redemption. But within a year, the marriage had unraveled. Joan filed for annulment in December 1986, citing irreconcilable differences. What followed was the most public, most humiliating legal battle of her life. Holm contested the prenuptial agreement, demanded 50% of her earnings, and later asked for $80,000 a month in spousal support. The trial became a media circus. Testimonies revealed that Holm had a secret lover, an aspiring actress named Romina Danielson, and that during Joan's working hours, he was conducting an affair in their home. At one point, Danielson fainted on the witness stand under aggressive cross-examination, and the courtroom erupted. Joan, sitting in that courtroom at 54 years old, watching a younger man and his mistress play out their drama, while the world watched, felt something crystallize inside her. She was not going to be humiliated again. On August 24th, 1987, the divorce was granted. Joan told reporters, "I don't need a husband, I need a wife." And she meant it. 4 marriages, 4 failures, and she was done. But here is where the story pivots, and where Joan Collins' true legend begins. The same year her 4th marriage imploded, she appeared on the cover of Playboy magazine at age 53 in a nude layout titled "50 is Beautiful." The move was radical, a defiant reclamation of her own sexuality and desirability on her own terms, at an age when the industry had already written her off. But it was also survival instinct meeting opportunity. Years earlier, in 1978 and 1979, she had starred in The Stud and the Bitch, adaptations of her sister Jackie Collins' novels. Those films had been commercial hits, revitalizing her career temporarily. The magazines were still calling. The audience hadn't completely forgotten her face. And then, in 1981, at the moment when her personal life was in free fall and her professional prospects seemed dim, she received an audition for a television series called Dynasty. The role was Alexis Carrington Colby, the scheming, vengeful ex-wife of a powerful oil tycoon. The part had been offered to Sophia Loren first. Loren turned it down. It came to Joan almost by accident, almost as a last resort. She took it because she needed the work and the money. What she didn't know was that this role would resurrect her career entirely, elevate her to a level of fame and power she had never experienced, and cement her as one of the most iconic television figures of the 1980s. From 1981 to 1989, Joan Collins appeared on screen as Alexis Carrington, and the world became obsessed. The show started as a modest hit, but with Joan's arrival in Season 2, Dynasty climbed the ratings, eventually dethroning Dallas as America's favorite primetime soap opera. Suddenly, the woman who had spent 30 years in B-movies and television guest spots was being paid $120,000 per episode and winning Golden Globe Awards. In 1983, she received a star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. She had finally achieved the fame that had eluded her in her youth. But she achieved it not as a young ingenue, but as a mature woman, playing a woman whose power came from intelligence, manipulation, and resilience. Aaron Spelling, the show's producer, noted that he hadn't written Joan Collins. She had played Joan Collins, and somehow she had made the character unforgettable. The role demanded that she embody strength, that she own the screen with a kind of regal authority that comes not from beauty alone, but from having survived. The public saw Alexis. Joan saw her own reflection, a woman who had endured, who had fought back, who would not be discarded. The Dynasty years were glittering, but they came with complications. As the show grew in popularity, Joan's demands for higher pay and better treatment escalated. By the 6th season, she was in conflict with producers over salary and creative control. She had spent her entire career being told what to do, being packaged and controlled and typecast. Now, finally, she had leverage, and she used it. The tension between Collins and the producers became public knowledge, and she became known as difficult, demanding, imperious. The image was not entirely unfair. She was demanding. But what the industry framed as diva behavior was Joan Collins refusing to be exploited anymore. She had learned that lesson in every marriage, in every studio contract, in every year she spent being beautiful for other people's profit. By the time Dynasty ended in 1989, she had leveraged her success into a parallel career as an author. In 1978, she had published her autobiography, Past Imperfect, and it became a bestseller. She followed it with Katie, A Fight for Life, a memoir detailing her daughter's recovery from the car accident, and then with a series of beauty books and romance novels. She wrote with the same authority with which she played Alexis, not apologizing, not minimizing, not asking permission. Her books sold millions of copies and were translated into dozens of languages. The late career chapters of Joan's life have been surprising in their vitality. After Dynasty ended, she might have faded into obscurity, like so many television stars of that era. Instead, she reinvented herself repeatedly. She guest starred on shows like Roseanne, The Nanny, and Will and Grace. She appeared in The Flintstones in Viva Rock Vegas as Wilma's mother. She toured the world with one-woman shows titled An Evening with Joan Collins and Joan Collins Unscripted, recounting the highs and lows of her life to audiences from London to Las Vegas to Sydney. In 2018, she appeared on American Horror Story, Apocalypse, introducing herself to a new generation of viewers. She has written more than 30 books, both fiction and nonfiction, selling over 50 million copies worldwide. She became a columnist, a social commentator, and, remarkably, a voice of unapologetic feminism for women in their 70s, 80s, and 90s. She refused to age quietly. She refused to disappear. She refused to accept the cultural narrative that women over 50 should retreat from public life. This refusal, which had once been framed as difficulty or vanity, began to be reframed as courage. In 2015, after a brief illness that she had kept private, Joan's younger sister Jackie died of advanced breast cancer. Jackie had been fiercely secretive about her diagnosis, telling Joan only 2 weeks before her death because she didn't want to burden her. The loss devastated Joan, who had always been close to her sister despite their complicated relationship as competing female talents in the same industry. Jackie's death also marked a turning point in Joan's willingness to speak about her own traumas. In 2023, at age 90, she sat down with Louis Theroux for a documentary interview and began to tell the full story of Maxwell Reed, of the assault, of the shame that had silenced her for 70 years. She also released a BBC documentary titled This is Joan Collins, in which she discussed her marriages, her daughter's accident, her struggles with depression and loss. These were not confessions made in shame, but rather testimonies made with the authority of someone who had nothing left to lose and everything to gain by speaking the truth. Today, at 91 years old, Joan Collins is still working. She divides her time between homes in London, France, and Beverly Hills with her husband Percy. She posts on social media, attends charity events, and continues to take on acting roles. She has been made a Dame Commander of the Order of the British Empire, a title that carries the weight of official recognition and respect. She is a grandmother. She is a survivor. And yet the arc of her life, traced from that beautiful baby in wartime London to this elegant woman in her 90s, is not a triumph narrative in the conventional sense. It is the story of someone who was broken repeatedly by the systems and people who were supposed to protect her, her first husband, the studio system, marriages that failed, a daughter's near death, a public humiliation that played out in courtrooms and tabloids. It is the story of someone who responded to all of that not with bitterness, though she has earned the right to it, but with work, with ambition, with a refusal to disappear. She turned her own survival into art. She turned her pain into characters. Alexis Carrington being the most famous, but also all the strong, scheming, resilient women she has played across decades. She turned her life into stories that other women could read and recognize themselves in. She built an empire of books and television and presence that outlasted every person who tried to contain her, or control her, or use her up. For stories about resilience, survival, and the women who refuse to fade away, subscribe to this channel. Joan Collins is still here, still working, still speaking her truth, and that, more than any role she has ever played, is the most powerful story of all.